All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the stream. I hope everybody is doing well tonight. Tonight, we're going to pick up where we left off last night with a little bit more discussion about general item design. And actually, tonight, we're going to talk about item representation in the inventory. So, we're picking up where we left off last night. But before we do that, I do want to just take a quick second and thank the supporters of the channel. Starting with our elite partner, Javier Alazaron, that is the highest tier of subscription over there on YouTube memberships and Patreon, followed by our partner, our partners rather, who are Gabrali's Inc. and Matt Oscard. That's the next tier there of subscription over there on YouTube memberships and Patreon. Followed finally, but not least, our supporters, who are a combination of the others tiers of support over on YouTube memberships, as well as Patreon and Twitch subscriptions. So thank you all very much for your support. It's greatly appreciated and helps me to cover the costs of this project, things like hosting fees, eventually assets, equipment costs, things like that. So that help is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much for that. And of course, I couldn't have this project at all without all of you, the viewers, whether you're joining us on the Twitch side or whether you're joining us on the YouTube side, or if you're just checking out the VOD after the fact. Thank you guys very much for being here. I really appreciate you guys. Okay, cool. So, with all that stuff said and done, let me just change setting here really quickly. All right, there we go. All right, so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to wrap up the discussion about item representation in general. So there's two ways that we need to represent an item, right? So we have the generic item information. So for normal items, as we see here, that includes things like name and description, whose string IDs are localized, purchase cost, sell value, weight, use effect, which is basically what happens if you use the item, how many charges it can have, stacking if we decide to support that. I still haven't decided on that. How long the cooldown is between usage of that item, and we might need to add something to that eventually that I have in mind, but and then also unique count, which is how many you can carry in your inventory. For equipable items, there's a little bit more to it. There is an equipment class, which is basically for weapon or armor. And so we basically have here what's going to amount to an enumeration. And then we also have equipment slots, right? So this will tell you what type of equipment item it is, and this will tell you where it can be equipped. And so the general idea is that we're going to use this to not only display information on the UI, but control how the item actually is able to be equipped and so on. And then we have, obviously, again, localized name and description strings, purchase cost, sell value, weight, quality ID, which is something we probably need to go ahead and put over in normal items. In fact, I keep forgetting to do that. So let's do that right now. So we'll do quality ID. All right, and for this first one, we're just going to use one. And so the quality is basically, we have these different quality levels, right? And then we have these different string IDs that go with those. So if we look at our strings table that we have here, it's basically these. So actually what I'm going to do is just as a reference, right, over here. We'll go ahead and put this way over here. Right? That's essentially what those mean. And so we have that. Equipment class and slot we've already talked about. Equip effect ID is something that you get additionally when you equip the item. Unique counts, again, is how many you can have in your inventory. -1 means that there is no limit. And then how much it affects strength, agility, mind, or vitality. The minimum damage and the maximum damage that it can do if it's a weapon. If it's armor, obviously that doesn't make sense. our attack rate, and our enchantment ID. So this is most of what we're going to need. We're probably going to add features to this or fields to this as we go. But this is the basic representation of an item as it exists in the game. So if you just have it kind of sitting in your inventory or you loot it or whatever from something, this is essentially what that item would look like. So there's this representation of it, which is sort of the general properties of that specific item. And then there's going to be the inventory specific representation of it, which will be things like obviously how many of them that we have, or if we have it at all. And then things like if we decide to do durability, it would be the durability of that thing. Enchantment ID would probably be, you know what, this actually belongs there, not here. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. Because enchantment is something that we would apply to an item in our inventory. It wouldn't be applied to an item that is dropped, right? So it would be that, and then any other sort of instance of that item specific data that we wanted to hold along with it. And so that is kind of what I'm thinking of there. We do have to go ahead and talk about key items as well, because we briefly touched on that last night, but we didn't really kind of get anywhere with it. So this we should probably talk about a little bit more specifically before we actually move on to the representation of these things in inventory and how that's going to work. All right, Diamond, good to see you. Let's see. Watching you yesterday, you motivated me to do some specification work for my game. Spent an inordinate amount of time defining a binary format for storing my assets. Nice. Now I need a UI to create items. Yes, we're going to need that too. And I actually had a brain fart on how I'm going to do that offline. By the way, do you have data types associated with your columns in terms of size? Or not worrying about it? I've been debating if it is worth doing this. So the way that our database, and I use air quotes around that because it's going to be a very specific type of database where it's not going to be generic or general. So like in a SQL database, you might have, int or big int or character or varchar or, you can have length of strings and stuff in there and length of characters. You can have all these different types, right? Small int, tiny int, all that kind of stuff, bit, right? All these different things. And so essentially in our case, we're basically just going to support the bare minimum of properties, right? So the way that I'm thinking about this is we essentially have, I'm actually thinking we could probably narrow this down to 3 types, maybe 4. So we have integers, which all integers in this are going to be signed. I don't see a reason to have unsigned integers in this, right? So all integers are going to be signed, and that's just going to be probably a 32-bit integer, because I don't think we're going to have anything that's going to be large enough that's going to be stored in this database that's going to require 64-bit. If we do, we can always up that in the future. It shouldn't be a huge deal, but I don't want to waste the storage space to do that now. So every integer is going to be signed 32-bit. And then we're going to support strings, right, which is just a character array. We're going to support floats, right? So not doubles or anything like that, just floats. And then I haven't really decided yet whether or not I want to support Boolean/bit, right? Because that's kind of a waste when we really could use another integer field and just treat it as bit flags, right? And use Booleans that way. So we might have 4, we might have 3. I haven't completely decided that yet. But other than that, I don't think it's going to be worth it, right? Because again, we know the types of data that are going into this database. So we know exactly what the requirements are. That's why we're reasoning about all this stuff now, so that we can figure out exactly all the things that we're going to need to know ahead of time, so that we don't make this more generic than it needs to be and more heavy than it needs to be. So I think probably for right now, I'm just going to start with those three types. And if for some reason we need Boolean, which I don't think we're going to need, that would be the fourth type. Is essentially what I'm thinking. So in my opinion, at least for what we're doing here, I am not going to worry about column size whatsoever. It's basically because all they're going to be represented by in memory anyways is just a, this typical DoD way of storing things, which is going to be an array of ints, for columns that are represented by ints, an array of floats for columns that are represented by floats, an array of strings, which is an array of character arrays, for items that are represented that way. And I mean, you could argue that maybe we should specify the size of a character array, right? But I don't really think that's going to be necessary because, again, all of that is going to be here in the strings. Like, all of our strings are probably going to exist in the strings table, right? So I think it's fine to have variable length strings. Maybe we'll set some sort of upper limit, but I don't even know if we need to do that. I hope that makes sense. Sikelos Music, good to see you. How's it going? Welcome. Singy, good to see you as well. And Natsulcat over there on the YouTube side, good to see you as well. Welcome. Okay. So, I think we have normal items figured out. Was there anything in here? I wanted quality ID in here. I think this is probably fine. I'm actually thinking pretty heavily about removing stack max, actually. I don't think we're going to allow items to be split and, have split stacks of items. It just adds unnecessary complexity, and I don't think we really need it. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of that, right? And I'm going to get rid of that over here on equipable items too. Because I think, actually, did we even have that here? Or was that only, that was only over there. We have unique count, which we are going to keep. So that's the total number of these things that can be stored in your inventory. If it's negative, that basically means there is no limit. Okay. All right. So key items. What is a key item? So a key item is going to be something that is in your inventory that is specific to a particular quest. And so this is going to be the type of item that has to take up inventory space somewhere. I don't know if it's going to be mixed in with your regular inventory or whether it's going to have sort of its own inventory just yet. I'm thinking it might actually have its own. Might make sense. This should actually be name string ID. All right, so that's going to be numeric. Description string ID. Again, going to be numeric. It'll look up into that strings table that we have. So the only thing that I'm thinking, what did we call? We had a separate. Actually, did I keep it in here, or was it only normal items that had it? I must have gotten rid of it. I thought that we had talked about a special type of string that was like additional flavor text, if you will. But I don't see that in here, so that's actually something we probably need to put back. So, let's see, in the strings table, let's see, we have this and then the description. Do we really need, like, if we look at this again, using WoW as an example, actually, this is a perfect example, right? So, in WoW, they actually have an item representation that looks like this, right? Where they have the name of the thing, and then actually, do they have a description, or is this, I guess this would be the description, right? Um, so I guess we could just say that this is the description text, and we set it up like this. This is kind of like just to add a little bit of extra information in here. We're not gonna be doing a lot of the things that are on here, but kind of taking inspiration from the way that this is sort of designed in terms of what this looks like. I guess we could use description for the flavor text, right? I think that maybe that's what we decided last night, and I just don't remember. Okay, so a key item would be something like, let's say, for example, and I guess we could go ahead and start setting some of these things up. Like maybe I'll use strings for example. We'll set up the strings first. So we'll have 2 new strings. Right, and this is a manual process now with the IDs. Obviously, when we go to set up an editor for the items, we'll have something that generates these IDs and links to them accordingly. All right, so what I'm thinking of is like probably some of the first quests that we're gonna go on is going to be gathering type of quests, right? That kind of teaches you how to gather items or pick up items within the world, or loot items or whatever it is. So I guess we could say, the first item is like maybe we, I don't know, pick carrots or something, right? So the carrot would be the name of the item, and then we would put here in its description text, we might put something like, pulled fresh from the ground, still has a bit of dirt on it, or something, right? And so when we go to create a key item, we would have 13 here as its name ID, 14 here as its description ID. The key item ID would be 1, right? And then the quest ID would link back to a particular quest. So for now, I'm just going to put -1 here because we don't have a quest system set up. We need to talk about that. And in this case, there's no using it, right? It's just an item that kind of sits in inventory. So -1 for that. Charges, it doesn't have any, so -1 for that. Cooldown, it doesn't have any, so -1 for that. We do have, though, unique count, right? And so maybe it wants you to grab 5 of them. So you can only ever hold 5 in your inventory. And so that would be an example of an item that you pick up and have to have a certain amount of them in your inventory to actually complete the quest, right? You have to go around and gather these different items. Once you have 5 of them, then the quest is technically ready to be completed. The criteria are met for it, and then you would complete it, right? So I guess we could say quest ID. I guess we could do, should we do 0-based? I guess we could do 0-based. I feel like 1-based might be better though, right? Because kind of like 0 is like a default state for things, and I don't necessarily think that that's probably something we want to do. So maybe we say most of this stuff is 1-based. Good to be seen. Going well. Glad to hear it. Let's see. Only reason I was debating it is some things are 8-bit enums and some are 32-bit stuff. Yeah, I mean, but I feel like something like this, even with a database that's got hundreds of items in it, like at the end of the day, you're not really talking about that much space for a table of this stuff, right? Strings for me are a position and size in a large string interned array with all the strings. So that's probably more or less the way this is going to work. I haven't really decided that. That would be an optimization that I would make sure is applied internally. That's not exposed to like the API of the database, right? One based people leave. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, zero base is everything else, right? The only reason I was thinking that is that, like, zero is kind of a default state, right? I could always say that quest ID zero technically exists, and it's just a quest you can't pick up, right? Um. Anyway, I guess that's not really important now. But yeah, this is basically what key items would look like, right? And then also we would have a use effect ID, which would, spawn some sort of effect or cast some sort of spell or something like that. And so we would need some way to reference what that actually does. It might be a use effect ID. It might actually be a string or a console command that gets executed or something like that. I haven't really decided how that's going to work just yet. I feel like if everything is zero based and a few are one based, that's a recipe for mistakes. Yeah, I tend to agree. Yeah. Um, in databases, though, normally when you have a primary key like identity, right, that normally is one based, actually. It's not zero based, usually. So that's kind of why I was like debating one based versus zero based, because in a lot of databases, those unique IDs are actually one based, not zero based, which is where I was getting that from. And that's why I started all of these things, like which would be essentially a primary key at one, not zero. So maybe we do just stick with one, right? And then if it's ever zero, we question why. That's the only reason I'm thinking about that. Are you working on the game now? Yes. So we're actually designing out what our items are going to look like. We're going to build a game-specific database to handle all of our item definitions, so that we can quickly query them, and we have a way to quickly access that data. So there's two representations of an item. There's sort of the generic representation of an item as it exists in this database, which includes all of the general information about that item, and then there's a inventory representation of that item that has a bunch of stateful stuff about it, about a particular instance of that item, which is actually what I really want to jump into tonight. So we have a couple of different types of items right now. We might wind up collapsing these into a single item type, but I don't think so. Because normal items have a bunch of various properties, which is what you would expect with most typical items in a game that sit in your inventory. They have a cost, they have a value to sell, a quality ID, which is basically item quality, right? So we have junk, common, uncommon, rare, epic, legendary. And then we have a weight for each of those items, which actually, key items, I think, should key items have a weight? Maybe they should. I haven't thought about that. I'm going to put it in for now. Right, and we can always set it to something stupidly small. Oops, 0.1, right? So that way, because equipable items have a weight and normal items have a weight, right? So then there's a use effect ID and a use effect string ID, which basically says gives a description of what happens when you use the particular item. And then the use effect ID is actually what effect actually gets cast, essentially, when you use it. How many charges the item has, what its cooldown is in seconds. One is obviously going to be too quick. That we probably ought to make that like, 15 seconds or something like that. Because this particular item is a potion. And then you can only carry 100 of them, right? And equipable items are essentially, weapons and armor, and then they have different slot information and how they affect the different stats. So we have all these things, and then key items are quest items, right? Essentially. So they kind of have their own various, little category, right? So my thought is we need another sheet here. And this is going to be item inventory representation, right? So I'm going to leave this little space here at the top just in case we need like a legend or something. But we probably are going to need let's see. We're going to need a couple of different things, right? I'm going to leave this first column blank for a second. So we're going to need the item ID, right? And that's going to be for, well, let's see. Should we have, because see, normal items and equipable items probably ought to share an item ID. I'm thinking. We might wind up combining those, but let's think about this for a second further. All right, so we'll do item ID. We can do quantity for things that are stackable, right? We'll also want to know, and this would generally be for like weapons and armor. It would be durability. That's if we do durability, right? But like that would be whatever the current durability is. We would also have enchantment ID. If the item is enchanted, what is the ID of that enchantment so that we can look that up. And then, actually, that might be it. Right, so this is like the instance of a particular item, is what I'm thinking. And so this is a direct representation of what the player's inventory would look like. And this is not going to be actually stored in the database, I don't think. This is probably going to be stored in the game state. Because the database, I think, is going to be read-only when we actually go ahead and launch the game. And so this would actually exist in player state. So I guess we should say player state inventory, right? And so, you would store the item ID. So like when we're talking about this first one, this is going to be like the rusty dagger, right? So we're going to want ID 1. So here we'd have ID 1, quantity 1, durability would be, probably by default, the max durability, if we even do durability. I still haven't decided if we're going to do that or not. To have to manage repairs and stuff like that. I still haven't decided that, but let's just say 100 for right now. And then enchantment ID, Rusty Dagger is probably not going to have an enchantment, and you're not going to have access to enchantments early on in the game, but you could, in theory, enchant the item later on. So the only thing that I can think otherwise that we would have is like an inventory item ID. And that would basically just be, a number in here. So if we needed a quick way to index the inventory, we would do that, right? But again, this is not going to be stored in the database. This is going to be stored as part of the player state. So we may or may not need this. We'll see where we wind up landing on that. Nice, can't wait to see how it goes. Still doing an endless runner. Oh no, we switched away from the endless runner. Yeah. So that idea evolved a few different times, but essentially where we landed was like there just isn't, for the idea that we were going with, there just isn't market demand for that kind of thing. So what we're actually building right now is a 3D isometric action RPG, which is much bigger in scope, yes, but much more interesting as well. Um, we also have, let me pull up the one moment. Site's being a little bit slow here. Okay. Loading. All right, so the game is called Shadows of Illumina, right? And Illumina is actually the name of the world, which we have done a lot of design discussion here on stream about. So we have this work in progress map, which we might be working on sometime soon. But essentially, the world is broken up into different zones that you can traverse through. And so we have all of these different zones that have been defined. We've got some lore behind this already written as well. In terms of different wars that have happened and the history and sort of where you start the game and that kind of thing. But yeah, let's see. Yikes, small project to huge. Yes, definitely. But this is the project that I was talking about anyways that I really, really wanted to develop. So I'm like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going for it. 4 to 5 years dev time for sure, but always a safe bet. RPGs are fun and classic. Yes, that's the idea. And so essentially this is going to be a bit of a non-traditional type of RPG. A bit non-traditional in the sense that we're not going to have experience points and levels. This is going to be, at least for now, this is the idea, right? We'll see how it works out. But for now, it's going to be like an active combat sort of somewhat close to Elden Ring, right? In terms of how the combat style works, although with some heavy modifications to the way that works. But essentially, your progression, so to speak, is going to be in terms of the gear that you collect and the attributes that you set. And what that means is it's going to be skill based essentially. So the idea is that if you wind up getting good enough at the game, that you could theoretically go through the entire game naked with a rusty dagger and be able to, get all the way to the end. There's not going to be level locking or any of that kind of stuff, right? If you're good enough, you should be able to do that. But most people are going to want to go through the typical route of getting better gear and crafting and all that stuff. But yeah, we have a 29-page document here that I actually have some additions I need to add. Going over, some of the background of it and whatnot. I don't have time to go through it all now, but we've done quite a bit of research. I've got some examples in here of some visual styles that we can play around with, and stuff like that, right? So lots of different ideas. We're just going to try a bunch of things out and see what sticks, essentially. But right now we're actually planning out the item and inventory system. So this is going to be, I guess this would be actually, how are we going to do this? So we need to think a little bit more about equipable items versus normal items. So we do have normal items are essentially look like this, and a lot of these properties are actually shared by equipable items. What I want to avoid, though, is I don't want to wind up in a situation like the problem is if we combine these two item types, then we have essentially all these columns in our database for each and every record, which I don't want, right? So for one of the examples, right, was this is how WoW sort of splits up their items, right? So there's an item class and then there's an item subclass, which has all of this. right? And then there is, let's see, quality is here. Um, let's see, where was the actual... Okay, so this table right here is the actual item, what they call the item template table in WoW, right? And this is all the fields that they have for every single item in the game. And I'm scrolling slowly, but not that slowly, right? Like, holy crap, right? I want to avoid this. I don't want to go this route. Um, and so, I think, when we think about the actual data itself of a typical item, it doesn't need to know all this stuff, which is why I separated them initially. Um, but I'm not 100% sure that that's 100% the right answer, right? Because like all of these fields here, essentially, up to here, actually no, up to here, all of these are essentially duplicated between the two. So maybe we have like a equipable items table that has a reference back to the normal items table, and then we have an item type or something on the normal items table that indicates, hey, is this an equipable item? We need to pull additional stats for it or additional things, right? You sure you want to make an RPG? It seems like it'll require lots of items, a lot of items. The balancing for this seems complicated and will require a bunch of assets. So yes, true, but the way that we are going to handle balance in this is, well, okay, I guess I can let the cat out of the bag. So I used to work in casino games, right? And without really breaking NDAs or anything like that, one thing that I can say about it is the way that they make sure that those games are balanced is they run them through something called a simulator. And they basically simulate billions of rounds of play, right? And so there's essentially a math model behind those things. And you run that through a simulator that simulates somebody pressing the spin button on a slot machine billions of times, right? And so when we come up with our math model for this, that is essentially what we're going to do is we're going to make some sort of simulator that just sits there and grinds numbers for just hours on end to make sure that things are balanced, right? And then we should get at the end how balanced or imbalanced this is, right? I mean, obviously that's only going to get us so far, right? And obviously we're going to have to do tons of play testing and stuff like that. But it's one of the reasons that I'm not going with too many different statuses and too many different, weaknesses and strengths and kind of things like that. We're not going with too many elements either, is for that, right? But I do have some ideas about how we're going to achieve balance. So I think a simulator is going to be the way to go on that. Kohi on the second monitor while I code my renderer is the vibe. Nice. I like it. I'm a fan. Let's see. Electric Lizard, how you doing? Wanted to ask if I, for example, have a studio and interested in using Kohi, would you act as a consultant? So, in the future, I would say yes, but I don't think Kohi is actually ready for that right now, as it stands. We need to run it through quite a bit of development first to make sure that things work right. That's why it's like very nebulous and it's changing. It's very volatile, I should say. It's changing quite a lot, right? And that's because as we go through developing this, I'm just like, oh, this kind of sucks to use, or oh, I didn't think about this particular point, right? And so I would say in the future, once it's a little bit more locked down, once we're further along with this project and we've got a little bit more in terms of tooling and some of the other things, I would say absolutely yes. But at the moment, I would not do it. I would not suggest doing it. You've heard of vibe coding. Vibe balancing is the new thing. So is that basically you just take the math model and throw it at ChatGPT and see what happens? Fuzz testing is something that is really useful. Yes, agreed. Especially if you can run your game headless, you can build fuzz testers and you can test years of gameplay every day. Yeah, that's kind of the goal, right? That's the approach I want to take in terms of that. Um, and so when we design our combat system, I'm going to be thinking in the back of my head that not only do I want to have the combat system be callable from the game and usable from the game, but I also want to be able to hook into that from essentially what is a test driver project that doesn't require all the graphics and stuff to be loaded, that just deals with timings and numbers, right? And that will really tell us how balanced everything is. I would consider making a huge struct for the items. Seems like the most flexible thing. So, what I'm trying to bear in mind here, too, is the problem is if we put all of this stuff in a huge structure, then lookups for that become really slow, right? So this is one of the reasons I'm saying I'm going to separate this into a database versus, just having a array of structures, right? Because what I don't want to do is, if I need to, really quickly iterate through all of the items in my inventory, or I need to really quickly iterate through all the items in the database, looking for something, querying for something. I don't want to have to pull in all of this data when I might only be looking for items that equip to slot 7, for example. And so if I were to go with a structure of arrays, then I could just pull just the columns of data I need. But if I have a giant structure and an array of those structures, then we're completely blowing out the cache as we're iterating those things, right? So yes, it's flexible, but we have to be careful about that. Now, there's two sides to this, though. In the database, it should probably be represented in a data-oriented way. That doesn't mean, however, that we can't have a large structure in code that gets filled out by the results of the database, right? So when we query into the database, maybe the database is formatted the data-oriented way that I just talked about, but maybe that builds out a structure for the item that is a long structure that we could just use, right? You would only pull the cache lines you actually read, right? No. So like when you pull in a structure to read values out of it, you're pulling in that whole structure into the cache line, or at least part of the structure, and then the next part of the structure to actually read the whole thing. Versus just pulling in a bunch of integers or something. Yeah, the larger the struct, the more your cache suffers. Exactly. So that's what we're trying to avoid, right? So for something like querying, right, we need to go the data-oriented approach and have each one of these columns stored as something separate. And that's fine. That's not too difficult to do. When we talk about gameplay code, it might be more convenient to store that in a structure because we don't really have to query that as fast. Each field is a different array. Exactly. So that's what we're talking about, right? So like the IDs would all be one array. The string IDs for the name would be an array. The description string IDs would be an array. The purchase cost would be an array. The sell value would be an array, right? And so when we go to write the database, that's how it's going to be represented internally. And then I can say it makes querying this data really easy and really quick because I can say, I want the columns or I want the rows of data that meet this criteria. And we can basically just blaze through those arrays really quickly and say, okay, every time I find one of these, all right, what's the ID, the row ID for this particular thing? Store a list of those, and then when we're done, we say, okay, now let's go through and obtain all the data for those rows, which is going to blow out the cache, right? But that's okay because we're ideally not going to have a huge set. So it's just, I hope that makes sense. I've probably done a crap job of explaining that, but Let's see. Taman, how's it going? Good to see you. If your struct takes up more than one cache line, the next struct in the array will have to evict a cache line. Yep, exactly. Let's see. Let me catch up over here on the YouTube side. Are there any templates demo projects for Kohi already? Not yet. That's actually on the list, but I wanted to get a little bit further in the development of this. So I actually have created a template for this game, right? So the way that our templates are going to work, I can at least explain this. The game code is going to exist at sort of the root folder, right? And so we have the library for the game code itself, and then the actual application for the game itself, right? So this is just the executable. It's super light. It contains almost no code whatsoever. It's purely there just to, essentially initialize the engine and kick off application-specific config, right? This is where all of the game logic exists in a shared library. And so the reason for that is during development, we can hot reload this library while the application is running. And so by having those things separated, it allows us to do that. So we have this whole structure here that has the actual game code at the top level. And then we have a Git submodule right now where we pulled in Kohi, the whole Kohi code base as a submodule. And then we reference that. And the reason we do it this way is because we can actually set this up to say, I want to use a specific branch and a specific version of Kohi to build my engine against. So as new versions come out, you're not breaking your build, right? You can still use an older build of the engine, and that is tied directly to your project via the Git setup, right? Which is something that already exists, very simple to set up, and works pretty well. And then at some point, if you wanted to, upgrade, you would essentially just change the branch of the submodule here and then fix whatever it breaks in your code, if it breaks anything, and then so forth, right? So when we create templates, we have something in here right now called the testbed. And so the testbed is kind of our testing application that exists that's packaged with Kohi right now. Testbed eventually is going to be hoisted up as a template and is going to look a lot like this game project here looks, where it's going to treat Kohi as a submodule. And so what you would actually do is instead of cloning Kohi directly, you would clone testbed and you would get Kohi along with that. And so I've got to build documentation around that. I've got a few things to sort out, but that's essentially the way that it's going to work. I also need to set up some scripts that sort of automate some of these processes for you so you don't have to do that stuff. But yeah, there are plans for it, but we're not quite there yet. So you're making your dream game? Yeah, I mean, it's the game I've wanted to make for quite some time. So yeah, I've always wanted to make an action RPG. And so this is super exciting for me to make, actually. Let's see, I've heard people recommend not using an ECS until you know you'll run into performance issues. Do you think it's good advice? Yeah, so we're not going to be using an ECS here. We are playing around some stuff in our scene that almost kind of wound up going that direction. I'm actually backing that out because it went a little bit too close to that direction. So the direction that we're heading is we're going to have very specific types of nodes that exist in the scene, and there will be a hierarchy of those nodes, and that's it. There's no game object and you attach a component to it or anything like that. It's just everything you deal with is nodes. And then there'll be a concept of prefabs where you can take certain combinations of those nodes and put them together, and you can attach you can attach like a scripted behavior, we'll call it, to that, that'll know, how to interact between the two. But most of that is going to fall on the actual gameplay code itself, pulling the nodes that it needs to and interacting with those nodes directly, as opposed to trying to cobble together an ECS and then, querying objects that way. It's a little similar to how Godot does it. Yep. Let's see. Kohi sequel. Will the game also be open source? So the game is not going to be open source right away. And the reason for that is kind of several-fold, actually. So I actually intend on selling this game, first off. There's also going to be assets that are used in the game that are not going to be open source assets. And so there'd be licensing associated with those assets, right? And then in addition to that, if I just release the game open source, like for free, then it doesn't really make sense to do that and put it on Steam, right? So it's not going to be open source initially. And I say initially because probably a couple of years after I release the game, and after it goes live, I probably will open source it at some point. But it's not going to be right away. Let's see. Seems over-engineered, to be honest. And that is what I am unsure of, right? Because you might not be wrong there. And so this is something that I'm trying out. It seems to work pretty well now. And it seems to work pretty well with being able to maintain different versions of the engine and being able to stick with a different version of the engine, right? Where I essentially upgrade the engine that I'm using along with it. So you're not wrong, but it's something that I've got to work out for sure. Yeah. So it's one of those things. I'm going to try a couple of different things to see what works. And then once I find something that I'm fairly happy with in terms of how it works, then we'll move on from there. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. Let's see. Okay, you guys are still talking about cache lines. Will you embed this data in C or load from a JSON or some other file format? So right off the bat, what I'm thinking is we're probably going to have a proprietary binary file format where it's basically going to be all of this data that we have here is essentially just going to get essentially binary serialized straight to a file. And the advantage to that is our database is going to be read-only, right? So it'll make it fast to open, fast to query through, because we'll just literally be able to use byte offsets for everything. And so I think that's probably the way I'm going to go. But we are going to have a separate utility that's going to be used to essentially create these items. And then that utility will either write out to that format directly, or it'll spit out a CSV or some intermediate format that I can then load into a database, right? But ultimately, the database itself is going to be just a huge binary blob, essentially. Let's see. 99% of games don't need ECS if you're building your own engine. Exactly. Yep. Do you have a gameplay to show? Is it too early? It's way too early, unfortunately. Yeah. We're still figuring out how some of our systems are going to look. So yeah, I don't really have any gameplay to show. We've done some very minor things, but like nothing that's even worth bringing up on the screen. We're still using like programmer art with boxes and stuff. It's too early at the moment to show anything fancy. I am looking into creating at least some assets, so we've got something to look at within the world. Let's see. Let me open up. This guy real quick. So I am. The screenshots that we have in the repo are actually from the testbed project, right? So they're just like the generic like Sponza type of thing, right? And something that shows off our cascading shadows and that kind of thing. And these screenshots are actually super dated anyways. So I need to eventually update those. But yeah, we don't really have any gameplay to show as of yet, unfortunately. Can load some Humble Bundle assets if you have them. That's true. Yeah, and I might look around for stuff like that, even if I only use it as a placeholder, right? So that's one thing I'm going to look into, is getting some placeholder assets in here relatively soon. Well, ECS is overkill. I just like using the one I wrote. That's fair enough. Yeah, but I won't be doing one because I'm not a fan of them. I thought this would be just about the perfect use case for SQLite, but then again, I haven't actually done anything like this. So, you're right. But one of the things that we do on this channel is we build a lot of stuff from scratch. And so we're going to build our own database. And it's going to be highly specific to the game we're developing, right? But we are going to develop our own database, essentially, and I use that term lightly, from scratch in C, because that's how we roll. Let's see. XMA, I appreciate that. Or is it XM AK 1987? I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce that, but I appreciate it. All right. Is this going to be 2D or 3D? 3D. Yep. It's a 3D. It's going to be 3D isometric. Because I can't think of the actual term, but it's going to be like an isometric perspective, but it's going to be all 3D. And part of the reason I'm doing that is because there are going to be like cutscenes where the camera will like zoom down, or rotate or look from different perspectives. It's not all going to be like that, right? It will be when you're playing the game, but like there'll be certain positions where the camera cuts to different angles and stuff. And so I want everything to be in 3D. XMAC. Okay, that makes sense. Appreciate the subscription, by the way. Will the gameplay be 3D? Yes, it will be. Saw a game today in the future games show that called themselves Exiled. Like, that was funny. That's funny. Yeah, right? Okay. So I'm kind of tempted to just take this stuff out of equipable items, right? Maybe we just have a normal items table, and then we have like equipable items will be sort of like an extended table. Thank you for the follow, by the way. I appreciate that. So like I'm pretty sure these properties here overlap with these guys. Pretty much exactly, right? I have these backwards, but let's see. The only thing is, these properties don't necessarily overlap with equipable items, right? So, something like unique count absolutely does. And that is actually something that equipable items should have. Oh, it does. It's just out of order, I guess. So the two choices are when we think about the structure of this, is we have just items, right? That includes just this basic stuff. And then we have like usable items or consumable items or something like that. That's a separate table that includes, this kind of stuff. And then we have equipable items, which includes this kind of stuff. Each of them having a base item ID that links back to that other table. Along with a item type that would exist here. And so the item type within this would also tell us what extended table to look at, if we did it that way. It might make more sense. It makes a little bit more sense in terms of data, because then we have a little bit more of a specialized column selection for the different types of items. It does slightly increase the complexity of, let's say we wanted to get do a selection of equipable items by... Well, actually, no, it doesn't really, I guess. So if we wanted to select equipable items by one of these properties, right? We could then, I guess, use the sort of parent item ID that's in each one of these rows to look back and get the generic information if we need that. Oh, Tammin, you're talking classes. No, we're not doing that here. No way. No way. Can items have states, like they get cursed or something? Ooh, that's a good question. I don't think so. Items? No. I don't think we're going to add that. But even if we did add that, that would be in player state inventory. That wouldn't be in the base properties of an item, right? But yeah, no, I don't think we need that. Water Clash is precious. We don't know about those around these parts. Yeah, I know, right? In world, quest items, and an inventory. Damn it. Let's see. I find 3D to be the easier to make due to the freedom of choice and design. Yes, it's easier and harder, right? Because like 2D sprites are much quicker to make than 3D models for sure. But it's not that big of a deal, right? Especially if we go with a visual style that's pretty simple to make stuff for, which I've been doing a little bit of thinking about lately as well. If we keep that simple, we should be okay. Quest items is an interesting category. Yeah, so that's key items is what we're calling it. Okay. Let's restructure this a little bit. Let's do... How do I want to do this? I guess we need... Oh, I feel like this is getting too complicated, though. I feel like this might, like, if we split it up this much, it's going to make it a pain to get this implemented initially for something that really probably might not matter all that much in the end. By the way, in quality, are you going to have unique set items? That's a very ARPG thing. I've thought about that too. Yeah. Yeah, I think... As much as I really don't like the design internally when thinking about the data, I might just go with the simple option. And then hide all that stuff behind the database layer. And just have a single table for items for now. Because the more I'm thinking about this, I'm like, yeah, I could split up this stuff to a lot of different tables, right? But that's going to make queries a pain in the ass. I'm kind of now leaning more towards the opposite, just to get it kind of done. Embrace the big struct. Well, it still won't be a big struct in memory, right? It's still going to be a structure of arrays under the hood. And what that's going to allow me to do is refactor it very easily, because then I can just change stuff under the hood and move things around to different locations of memory under the hood of the database and then, to make that refactoring easy without affecting the sort of external objects, right? So there'll be an external object that we will sort of be selecting, and then there will be, the database representation of that. So I guess let's do this. Let's take this and move it down here. We're gonna say item type ID, right? And this is basically just going to be an enumeration, right? And then I don't even know if we're going to have like a text description of this or not, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. But all I'm going to say is description, right? So item type ID, first one I'm thinking is will probably be, I guess we'll do weapon, right? And then 2 would be armor, and then 3 would be well, actually let's do key item, right? And then 4 would be consumable. Yeah, we'll stick with that for now. We'll add more types as we need them. And then let's take all of these and move them over one. And we'll rename this one to item type, right? And then this would be, this first one here is going to be a consumable, right? So there's that, and then it has the name string ID, the description string ID, purchase cost, sell value, quality ID, weight and unique count, and then we still have this concept of use effect and charges, right? So we could probably take that and move it down here. I didn't miss anything here, did I? Oh yeah, I missed cooldown. Right, so this one is basically a potion, essentially, right? And so we would probably start off with this and then add equipable items to that, right? All these various different things, and then key items, I guess, any properties for that, we would add onto it in the end. So I think we could just start with like a whole huge table that kind of represents everything, and then if we decide that there's any sort of heavy cache missing or something, or something along those lines going on, when we go to do our queries, we can always fix it later. Kuju raiding with a party of 33. How's it going? Thank you so much for the raid. How are you doing tonight? What'd you get up to on stream? I think I saw that you were working on, what was it, nav meshes or something like that, or navigation? What's happening here is we are figuring out an inventory system. So we're sort of designing what this might look like, thinking about the data before we actually start the code. Just to kind of get an idea of like what properties we want, where we want them to be, how we want to query them. And we're basically going to set up our own custom database for this that we can query from. And so the idea is that we should be able to query item data really fast and be able to get, certain subsections of data on that, whatever we essentially need. So we're going to design the database in a very data-oriented way so that we can just, blaze through data really super fast in our queries. And then, return out a selection of filled out structs that actually contain the actual data. So yeah, I'm trying to think about how the data is going to look now before I start coding it, and then we have like issues with that, which we might anyways, right? But like that's kind of the idea. Um, Decided to try out nav meshes, which I think will be 100 times faster than nav grids. So far, it basically is. Oh, that's awesome. I might have to watch the VOD on that and take some notes, because that's a problem I'm eventually going to have to solve. I've got some ideas on how I want to solve it, but I haven't really picked something yet, so it'll be interesting to see where you land on that. Look at this guy doing actual game design. I mean, I'm trying, right? We're writing a document over here with some notes in it. This is hardly an organized game design document, right? But it's got some stuff. And we have a world map that we're working on too. So, you know, it's coming along. I figure stuff like this, if I design it ahead of time, hopefully that will keep the number of refactors down. But yeah, that's kind of the goal. Let's see. I feel like I might have missed a chat. Let's see. In your case, you'll probably query info from multiple arrays most of the time, so AOS makes sense in your case. No, I don't actually think it does. Because usually when I'm... So if I'm going to... if I'm going to query for an item, I'm going to query it by something like item type, right? Or I'm going to say, give me all of the items that can be equipped to the head slot, or give me all the items that, I don't know, have a particular strength effect or something like that. I can also do individual queries, right? Like, give me the data for item ID 1, right? But, like, I should be able to query these things in bulk as I need to. Let's see. So, yeah, you don't want to access every field all the time, which is exactly why I'm not doing an array of structures, right? So, the difference being, in the database, it's going to be a structure of arrays. But when we go to actually use it in the gameplay code, it's going to be transformed from that to an array of structures, right? Because in the game code, it's actually going to make more sense to have a structure containing all of that array. But when we store it in the database, a structure of arrays makes more sense. Don't see why you would loop through all the items for a specific number for item dropping and generation. Yep, exactly. Item dropping and generation. Yeah. All right. All right. So that is basically the idea that we're going to go with, right? So we sort of have these separate classes of items right now, and I'm going to kind of combine those all into a single table for now. The other thing that this allows me to do by going with a structure of arrays, is if I need to split these up to make the queries faster, it's going to make that a hell of a lot easier to do, to just take a section of columns and move them to a different structure that maybe has less of those things. It's going to be a lot easier to move that than it would be to split apart all these structs and rewrite all my queries and that stuff. I would have those things hard-coded like an enemy zone has these items. Yeah, so that's probably not the way that we're going to do it, though. I'm going to want that to be configurable, right? Because I don't want to have to go through there and like write that for every single enemy. Because eventually we're going to have like a designer application where we can go in there and like we can create a monster, and we could say, here's this monster, this is the model it uses, these are the various spells that it has, here's its loot table, here's the drop chances of all that stuff. I definitely don't want to think about have to code all that stuff from scratch every single time. That should be configurable for sure. And that data will probably also be in this database. I was thinking about the gameplay. Yeah, so the gameplay, it does make more sense to have an array of structures, right? Because that's how you're going to be accessing that data. Let's see. And then, like, for our inventory, for example, like our player state inventory is going to be very simple. That's just going to be an item ID, which we can then look up. How many of those things that we have? What's the durability if it applies? And what's the enchantment, right? And that kind of stuff. Like this table is going to wind up being pretty small overall. Let's see. So probably at startup, you'll build the tables, which contains structs of every item that satisfies certain queries. It depends. I'm going to avoid building anything at runtime. What we really want to do is our game state is going to contain just IDs to things. And then when we actually go to display that in the UI, or we go to, calculate damage or something like that, or go to display it as an actual equipped item or whatever it is, at that point we would pull that data from the database and get it. No point in optimizing queries until we actually write the game and see what kind of queries are bottlenecks. And that was what I was basically getting at. I think I was kind of going a little bit too far down the rabbit hole of like trying to figure this out, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these items that we've sort of come up with so far, and I'm going to combine them into one. So we have, let's see, so we have use effect, charges cooldown, wait. So these columns are what we need to add to this guy. And then these two items. And in fact, I'm actually just going to grab the columns really quickly because I don't know that the tables are actually aligned. So let's just put that there. Right, yeah, see, so we have some of these are backwards. So I'm going to have to fix some of this. And actually there's a description string ID. Oh, we're missing item type is what it is. Okay. So let's take all of these and I guess move them over one to start, right? So these were equipable items rather. So I think we had, let's see, the descriptions, string IDs were 9 and 11. So this concept we are going to have to keep. Okay, so 9 is the weapon and 11 is the armor. So this one is going to be item type 1. This one's going to be item type 2. And then these columns are reversed. Right, so I'm just going to put this here and then change this to 0, 0 like it was there. All right, and then equipment class, slot and effect are going to be here. Actually, let's move all of this stuff first. Get this out of the way. So that's going to be strength effect is going to be here. And then we want these three here. Whoops. We want these three here. There we go. Okay, so use effect for these is going to be -1, which essentially means null in our database. So there's that. There's no charges on these either. So we could do -1 or 0, I suppose, would make sense for that one. There's no cooldown either, right? So that's, we can do -1 on that one as well. And then unique count, I thought we already had over here. Yeah, we do. So we can actually eliminate this column. Delete column. There we go. Okay, so we have unique count there. Let's see. So we actually didn't even define a unique count here. So these unique count should be 1 for each of them. Well, I guess they're low, kind of crappy items, right? So we're just going to put -1 for those. There is no unique count for that. Okay, so I think we can go ahead and just delete these guys. There is no cooldown. Whoops. That's an empty one. Equip slots. Let's see. How do we wind up being... Oh, because this has a unique count. That's why. These two belong over here. Okay, so equip class. Equip class. One of these is going to be a dagger, which is going to be 4. And then the other one is going to be 13, which is cloth, right? So we have 4 and 13. And a lot of this is going to make more sense like when we actually have something to visualize this, right? But for now, this is all we have. Okay, so I think all those line up, so that's good. We can delete that. Now, this first item is a potion, right? So obviously it doesn't have a lot of this stuff. So this is what I was talking about. Like, we are going to have a lot of -1s in here. We could also say 0, I suppose, but like min damage, max damage, attack rate, like all those items don't exist for a non-equipable item, right? And that was one of the reasons I was like, should we separate this into different tables? But I am not going to optimize for that for right now, right? So we can take all of this, take all of that, move it here, right? And then increment the item IDs, and we should be in better shape. Equip class could be useful for regular items. How do you figure? .3D visual design is hard, though. I can code a renderer, but I can't use it to save my life. That's fair enough. Fair enough. I understand that pain somewhat, but I do at least have some background in art, so I've got to sort of restart those skills because I haven't used them in a long time. But yeah, we're going to be hitting that up pretty hardcore here before too much longer, I think. Thinking about the offhand in Minecraft where you can hold basically anything. So we're not going to have that. We're not going to have that. We're not going to have it pick up, like where you can pick up and carry an item and plop it down somewhere else in the world. That's not a mechanic we're going to have. That just adds way too much complexity. Not something that is going to be worth implementing, at least for this project. Okay, I guess we can do... Let me take this note, actually, from here and move this back over here. We want to put that here. All right. So we can get rid of... We can get rid of this. Right, and we'll just keep this as sort of a lookup for the various different types for now. Okay, so the only other item type that we have is key items. And key items are, again, something that we may... I mean, if we think about this, actually... We do have like a use effect ID is really the only thing that's different, right? Everything else we have as like a Well, okay, we have quest ID too. So I suppose, like, for normal items, maybe we don't need quest ID though. Maybe we do. Maybe we can literally just use these properties that we already have here. Because we do have like a use effect and a use effect string, potentially. Right, so like maybe we don't need a separate thing for this. Right, maybe we just have this for like as just a regular item, right? So like we put this in here. Well, you know what? I probably should have copied the headers with that. Let's see, it was key items. Grab the headers. Okay, so we can immediately take this and move it over one. And then we have this, I'm going to move over again to here. And then we have use effect ID, I think is what that is. Yeah, okay, so we're just going to use effect. We're not going to have a separate one for key item type. Charges. Don't we have, we already have charges here, right? So charges, cooldown, and unique count. So let's put this here, and then unique counts, in this case, is 5. So I'm going to take quest ID for a second. I'm going to put it down here, and we'll come back to that. Right, and so unique counts can go here. All right, do we have anything lined up? I think we do. Okay, so the only reason that I can think of that we might want quest ID is so that maybe if we hover over an item, we can then display text that says what quest it goes with. But, you know, for most records, that's going to be -1, right? So we'd have to do -1, -1, -1 for all of these. And then, you know, this one would be quest ID 1 because it's a key item. And we can actually nuke. Let's see, delete that row. And then our item type here is going to be key item, so that's 3. And then we already have strings. Purchase cost and sell value would be 0. So anytime sell value is 0, that means you can't sell it. And then purchase cost 0 means you can't buy it from a vendor. And then we have quality ID, so we could probably just use 1 for that, which is just, you know, your typical item. Use effect string ID. I don't think we came up with anything for that. Yeah, because it doesn't have actually a use effect. So that's going to be -1. And then equipment class, like all of this other stuff, is pretty much, I think, going to be -1 all the way down to quest ID, right? So will it let me actually do this? It won't. Okay, lame. Maybe it'll let me paste it. There we go. So, you know, this is a bit wasteful for key items. But I guess it's not the end of the world, right? We're not going to wind up with gigabytes worth of wasted data, I think, because of this. And we might even be able to do an optimization later to use 16-bit integers instead of 32, depending on how far we go with this, right? But I'm going to start with 32-bit. Let's see. Catch up on some messages here. If I can expand my window so I can actually read more of them. No, but like a torch item that can be used in the offhand. So I see what you're saying. But we do actually have something for that, right? So we actually do have, for equipable items, we do actually have an anima enchanted or offhand items, right? So this is kind of like a nebulous, like random kind of item thing, right? And so one equip effect that we could have for that is maybe it spawns a little bit of light around you. So if you have it equipped, it gives you a little bit of light. Can open up questline mechanics that can be interesting for gameplay. Like, for example, you have to be holding something in your hand to progress through a quest, right? Or maybe you have to have it equipped. And we can do that with this system, actually. So that's actually not too crazy. If the items on the hand are visible, it definitely adds some visual appeal and immersion. Yeah. Could it be like an extra data column that way, or that can be used for whatever is needed for that item? And for key items, it can be quest ID, and for others, you can use it context aware. Yeah. I was thinking that might be one way to do it. And I did have that thought. So it's not like specifically quest ID, right? It would be what would I call it? I guess it would be like additional data 1, maybe, right? And so I guess, it would probably be null in a lot of cases. And then for this is the first case that we come across that maybe it's used for that. So like, I guess we could say, quest ID for key items or something like that. I think that's what you're getting at. Do items need to know what quest they belong to? I would make the quest ask for this for its ID instead. Yeah, so you're not wrong there. The only reason I'm thinking of even putting this in here is because if you are looking through your inventory, right, and you have this item in your inventory and you're like, what the heck is this thing and why can't I get rid of it? When you hover over its information, it gives you a little blurb of what it's about. It could say, I'm for this quest. Rather than having to query all of the quests that you're in and say, well, which one of them has this particular item ID, and looking it up backwards, right? That's the only reason I can think to do that. Which I think is going to be something you're going to want to be able to do. So yeah, maybe we just go with an additional data, and then we could always add more additional data columns if one is not enough. But yeah, I think this is going to work for now. I think this looks okay. It simplifies things, right? One thing I think I want to do though. Oops, I need to grab one more row above that. I do want to take all of these and move them down for a second. Because I want to take these definitions that I've put in these other tabs. And put them here, right? Just to make it a little bit so we don't have to go as much back and forth. So this one, like, we can delete this one. Yes, I want to delete that sheet. I want to delete that sheet. I don't need no more of that sheet. All right, let's delete this one. We have what we need out of there. Okay, and so that kind of simplifies this a little bit. Also, item quality, I feel like we could probably take this also and just move it. Let's see, that needs 4 columns. Let me shrink that down. So we'll put this here for reference as well. I'll tab it down a little bit, maybe right there. Let's see. How many rows do we have? We have 7 rows. Okay. Let me see if I can make this fit. Right there. Yeah, that's close enough. All right. Just in case we add more of those, right? And then we can get rid of this one. I guess we could jam languages in here too, right? Even though, so this is kind of its own table. Maybe I should leave this here. I don't know. String should definitely stay in its own for now, I think. Use effect. Haven't really talked about that yet. I don't really know how I want to handle use effect. I don't even know if that is something that should be stored in the database or if it's something we should just look up in code. I think we could probably just look that up in code, but all right, so I think I'm pretty satisfied with how this looks. So we can simply look up if we want to get information on a specific list of items. We can look them up by ID, or we can query them by item type or any of these other columns. And we'll have those IDs via player state inventory, right? So I don't know if we're going to need this column or not. I don't tend to think so. But we'll have item ID, quantity, durability, and enchantment ID. Do we need anything else? So this is basically the state of the item as it exists in your inventory, right? So it represents specific instance or instances of items. Will graphic data be stored here? No, it won't. Nope. Size and position on the texture. Curse state, wet state. Yeah, I don't think we're not going to have any of that. Curse state or wet state. You do bring up an interesting point about size and position on the texture. That's if we wind up using a texture atlas, which I don't know that we're going to do. It depends, right? So let me just pull up a couple of examples. So let me just grab an example really quickly of what I'm thinking of. So we could do trying to find a really good example of what I'm talking about here. Okay. So here's, whoops. I'll just drag this tab down. So here's one way of doing it, right? Of doing inventory. And then here is sort of the WoW / Final Fantasy way of doing inventory, right? So there's a couple of different options here. So we could have a list of inventory items like this that just is text. It gives a couple of different, some currency information, how many you own, things like that. This is actually a vendor view, but the concept's the same. And what this actually does, if you've played the game, is it gives you item categories up here, right? And so there's different ways that you can actually kind of look through the items. The inventory works exactly the same way. And then when you hover over one, it actually shows you a 3D preview of what the item looks like, right? So there's this way of doing it, or there's the sort of traditional WoW slash Final Fantasy 14 way of doing things, where you have essentially a backpack with item icons inside of it. So if we were to go this item icons way, then using a sprite atlas would be the way to go. And then we probably would want to store size and position, or texture coordinates in the database. So it really depends on how we want to actually store that. I'm going to table that for now, and we'll come back to it because we can always add. To the database later after we have it set up, after it's designed and set up. We could always add 2 columns. That'd be really, really simple to do. And more than likely, it probably wouldn't all be on the same sprite sheet anyways. It'd probably be a couple sprite sheets because I would imagine after you get so large, you would probably have to split some of that stuff up. So I don't know whether we want to have sort of the 3D view of a texture or of an item, with a model and textures and all that stuff, or if we want to represent it this way. Some items it would be very easy to handle it this way, like like your sword. Your sword's already going to show up in your character model, so we could very easily just display that here as well. But for something like a potion that might not necessarily have a 3D model, we'll have to make a 3D model for that. But I think if done correctly, that could look really good. So I don't know. I feel like most items wouldn't be too hard to actually make. We don't have to go this detailed with it, right? This is kind of bananas. But those are, it's if we go this route, it would be probably what sprite it belongs to, and then texture coordinates on that. And if it's a sprite sheet, they're all going to be the same size. So really all we'd have to do is give an offset. Versus this would have to be pathed to probably a static mesh asset that gets loaded. So we'll see where we wind up landing on that. I don't know exactly yet. That would probably be something that winds up going in, a column here at the end with like additional, like maybe display data or something like that. Okay. But you do bring up a good point, so that's something we're going to have to think about. I can just think about it in the future. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to call this just items. All right. I think we have our design for not only our database, but how we're going to hold items in player state inventory. In the data representation of the player state inventory doesn't actually require us to do anything as far as how we're actually going to represent it graphically. So we don't even have to think about that yet. Because probably we might support sorting, right? But like at the end of the day, really inventory is just a list of items, right? The only things we have to decide is if we want to allow holes in that inventory, right? So, what if this particular spot is empty, for example? But in a system like this, you wouldn't have that or need it, right? So I feel like I kind of like the idea behind this system better than this, right? Because I feel like this just gets jumbled and messy. Like one of the things I always had trouble with both WoW and Final Fantasy 14 was organization of the bags, right? Because it's like this and like finding items. Like sometimes what the item's icon looks like, but like I find myself doing a lot of hovering here, and I don't like that, right? And also it's a pain in the ass on the controller. versus this kind of works both ways. Because it gives you both a description of the item, it gives you the class, it allows you to sort this way, filter this way, and find very easily, and we could very easily add a search box here. So I'm kind of leaning more towards this design in terms of inventory. But okay, so in terms of what an item is actually going to look like when we query it, that is going to wind up being, and I suppose we could actually quickly kind of start thinking about what that's going to look like in code. So let's see, we'll put that in here, and we'll put this under Illumina type, so I guess that makes the most sense. And I'm actually just going to go, I'm not even going to worry about state data yet. We're just going to represent the items first, right? So as far as the gameplay code goes, not talking about the database now, as far as the actual gameplay code goes, how an item will be represented will be, should I just call it item? That feels kind of dumb. I don't know what else to really call it, though. Item is just kind of it, right? I guess we'll just call it item. And then we'll also have type def struct item type, right? And so we'll have item type. Let's see. So our different item types are weapon, right? Which is going to equal to 1. We'll come back to that in a second. Item type armor equals 2. Item type, we'll just put key. Yeah, we're not going to type key item. That'd be kind of stupid. And then item type consumable, which would be 4, right? Oh, I put struct instead of enum. There we go. I was wondering why that was bleating. All right, so we have that, and then we should also probably have an item type unknown, right? And this is going to exist. This is basically an invalid item type. There has been an error, right? So if we ever see item type unknown, that's going to be invalid, right? So if we take a look at this, right, we have our the next thing is like item ID, right? So I am actually going to type def a U32 as item ID. And the reason I'm doing that is because that type might change, but at least I can just use item ID everywhere in code. And that way, if I go to refactor this, all I have to do is just change it to a U16 or a U32 or what have you. So I'll do item ID, and then I'll just do ID, right? And then we have item type. And then we have, let's see, name string ID and description string ID, right? So that's the database representation of this. So by the time we actually get here, right, it's just going to be a string. And then we have purchase cost and sell value, right? So we could just use, should we define a type for that? I think we probably should. Type def, and we'll do, I guess we'll do a U32 for now. That's probably going to change. What do we want to call it? We don't have a name for our currency yet. I guess I'll call it currency with a to-do. Rename me, right? And we'll have currency, and we'll have, what was it called again? Purchase cost and sell value. So I guess we'll do cost and currency value, right? And then we'll have quality ID, right? So instead of quality ID, we'll actually have item quality, right? So we'll have item quality, and then we'll do junk, right? And then duplicate that a few times. So we'll do common, common, uncommon. Let's see, what are the other ones? Rare, epic, and legendary. And I don't know that these are the names that we're going to stick with, right? But that'll just exist for now. So we'll do item quality, right? And so, I mean, you guys don't have to watch me fill all the rest of this out, right? I can do that off stream. So this is the gameplay representation of an item. And then really quickly, we'll talk about the typedef struct, and we're going to say db items, or maybe we'll just do db underscore items, right? db items, right? And so in this case, what we're actually going to have is we could use the item ID type here. And that's going to be an array, right? And that's just going to be item ID. I guess maybe we just put IDs, right? And we also need to have a U32 total count, I guess, right? And so we'd essentially have all of these various different properties, right? So we'd have item type, name string ID, item type, types, and then we'd have U32, I'm thinking, name string IDs, U32 description string IDs, right? And so the idea is that we could quickly loop through all of these using the total count that we have here. This total count will be the size of all of these arrays. Or when we go to query an item, we can query it by ID, we can query it by type, we can query it by name string if we want to do that for some reason. For example, when we search our inventory, there's a good example of it, right? We could quickly iterate through the name string IDs to be able to look that stuff up. Let's see. So yeah, I guess this will pretty much wind up pretty much aligning with what's here. The only difference is the way that it's stored, right? So instead of having a structure of arrays, or instead of having an array of structures, rather, we'll have a structure of arrays. And that'll make it very quick to query from within the database, but when we go to actually represent it in gameplay, it's going to look like this. So that's kind of the idea. And obviously I will, work on building out these structures a little bit further. But for tonight, we're basically out of time. actually, because I do have to get up and go to work in the morning. So that is pretty much going to do it for tonight. We made some good progress, though. I mean, obviously we didn't write a lot of code, and that's okay, but at least we have come up with a final design of what our items are going to look like, both kind of in the database. We made some decisions about database versus game representation, and then how it's going to look in the inventory. And I think this this setup that we have here is going to work pretty good. I think we're gonna do decently well with that. So with that, let me also find somebody to raid really quickly. And I think I see who I'm going to raid, actually. So, actually, looks like Chris is actually online, so we're going to raid CM Griffing tonight. See what he's up to. And, yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. I will catch you guys on the next one. If you haven't already, I would greatly appreciate a follow and or subscribe, depending on which side you're on. And yeah, that's going to do it for tonight. So I will see you guys next time. See ya.